Imagine a room in Texas with plain walls and a cold metal table. Everyone who sits there knows they'll never see another sunrise. What would you eat for your last meal on Earth? Some choose pizza, others want their mother's cooking. One man even asked for dirt. We'll get to that strange story later, because what happens in these rooms reveals something fascinating about being human, something we rarely discuss. Let's go back to September 21st, 2011. A man named Lawrence Russell Brewer sat in a Texas prison, facing a truly enormous last meal. We re-talking 2 chicken fried steaks with gravy, a triple bacon cheeseburger, a cheese omelet, fried okra, a pound of barbecue, 3 fajitas, a meat lover, pizza, 3 root beers, a pint of ice cream, and a slab of peanut butter fudge. After the prison staff spent hours preparing all this food, they brought it to his cell. And then, he didn't eat a single bite. He just looked at it and said he wasn't hungry. The very next day, Texas abolished the last meal tradition. After 87 years, it was over. Now, inmates in Texas get the same standard meal as everyone else. But why did last meals even exist? The tradition is ancient, rooted in the belief that feeding a condemned person would prevent their spirit from returning to haunt you. It was seen as a final act of peace, of mercy. In America today, 30 states still allow special last meals, but with rules. In Florida, the budget is $40. In Oklahoma, it's just $15. The requests themselves are a window into the human soul. Many don't ask for fancy food, but for comfort. Fried chicken, mac and cheese, their grandmother's biscuits. One man requested a single olive with the pit still inside, which he left on his plate. Some believe he hoped an olive tree, a symbol of peace, would grow from his grave. Another man asked for a cup of dirt. The prison refused, but imagine that desire, to taste the earth itself one last time. Someone else wanted a single piece of birthday cake because they'd never had a birthday party. These choices whisper secrets about stolen childhoods and rare moments of happiness. But here's where the story gets really complicated. Not everyone on death row is guilty. Since 1973, over 190 people have been released from death row after being proven innocent. That's 190 human beings who came within hours of being executed for crimes they didn't commit. Think about Cameron Todd Willingham, executed in Texas in 2004 for allegedly setting a fire that killed his 3 daughters. He maintained his innocence until the very end. Years later, fire science experts concluded the fire was likely an accident, and the evidence used to convict him was flawed. But by then, it was too late. These realities haunt the people who work in prisons. Guards, wardens, chaplains, many suffer from what they've witnessed. The methods of execution have also changed. We've gone from hanging and firing squads to the electric chair and now, mostly lethal injection. Each step was supposed to be more humane. But is it? In 2014, an execution in Oklahoma went horribly wrong. The man writhed in pain for 43 minutes. States are now struggling to get the necessary drugs, leading them to try new, untested combinations. Alabama recently used nitrogen gas for the first time. Witnesses described the man shaking and gasping for over 20 minutes. Right now, about 2,100 people are on death row in America. Most live in cells smaller than a parking space, often in isolation, for 22 hours a day. The average time spent on death row is now over 20 years. 20 years in a tiny box, waiting to die. The stories from these final moments, the last meals, and the lives behind them raise profound questions about justice, mercy, and what it truly means to be human. If you found this story compelling, please hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Imagine being locked away for so long that you forget what grass feels like under your feet. The isolation is so complete, you start talking to the walls just to hear a voice. You watch your family grow old and die through a thick pane of glass during rare, heartbreaking visits. Then one day, you get a date. Not for release, but for your own death. An execution date. Suddenly, the last meal becomes real. What do you choose to eat before you die? Some inmates spend weeks, even months, wrestling with this decision. Do they pick a comforting food from childhood? Or something exotic they've always wanted to try? Do they even eat it all? A photographer named Henry Hargreaves recreated the last meals of famous inmates based on prison records. The photos are haunting. A single olive, a hamburger and fries, 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. These ordinary plates of food force you to confront an uncomfortable truth. These were real people with tastes, memories, and preferences. But then you remember, so were their victims. And that's where it gets complicated. We're talking about people who committed horrific crimes, who destroyed families and caused unimaginable pain. Take Timothy McVeigh, executed for the Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people, including 19 children. His last meal was 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. Simple. Cold. Did he deserve that small comfort? The families of his victims have vastly different opinions. Some want to witness the execution, seeking closure. Others oppose the death penalty entirely, believing that more death doesn't heal their pain. They argue it just creates more loss, more broken families. In a powerful example, the mother of a murdered girl became friends with the mother of the man who killed her. 2 women, linked by a shared, unbearable tragedy. Both lost a child, just in very different ways. The night before an execution is silent. Guards whisper. The condemned person might have visitors, children pressing their hands against the glass, trying to touch a parent one last time. Others refuse visitors, not wanting that to be their child's final memory. They write letters or make desperate last-minute calls. Sometimes, the phone rings with a stay of execution. But usually, it doesn't. The guards come, and they say it's time. The final walk begins. In that last room, with witnesses watching, they are asked for their final words. What would you say with your last breath? Who would you speak to? The answers are often surprising, disturbing, and challenge everything we think we know about justice and mercy. This isn't just a story about food or death. It's about who we are as a society and the complicated line between right and wrong. The truth is far more complex than you can imagine. Thanks for watching. What do you picture when you hear the words execution chamber? Most of us imagine something vast and terrifying, but the reality is much more mundane. In most prisons, it's just a small, plain room. A gurney in the middle, or maybe a chair bolted to the floor. The walls are in neutral color, beige or gray, nothing you'd remember. And there are windows. Behind those windows, in separate rooms, people are watching. One room for the victim's family, another for the inmate's family, sometimes a third for the press. This is where final words are spoken. When serial killer John Wayne Gacy was executed, his last words were "kiss my ass." He chose to leave the world with pure hatred and defiance. But his words are not typical. What most people say in their final moments reveals something surprising about the human heart, even in the darkest of circumstances. The most common last words on death row are not, "I'm innocent," or even, "I'm sorry." They are, "I love you," spoken to parents, children, and siblings watching through the glass. One man, lying strapped to a gurney in the middle of July, sang "Silent Night." It was the song that brought him comfort. In 1998, Carla Faye Tucker was executed in Texas. 14 years earlier, high on drugs, she had committed a brutal double murder. In prison, she underwent a profound transformation, becoming deeply religious and filled with remorse. Her last words were, "I am going to be face to face with Jesus now. I love you all very much. I will see you when you get there." Her case sparked a global debate. If someone truly changes, should we still execute them for who they used to be? Some inmates use their last words to apologize to the victims' families, hoping to bring them peace. But does it? The answers are complicated. Some family members say watching the execution provided closure, a sense of justice served. But others, like one mother who watched her son's killer die, felt only emptiness. Her son was still gone. The execution didn't heal her grief. It just added another layer of trauma. Bud Welch lost his daughter in the Oklahoma City bombing. He initially wanted revenge, but then he met the bomber's father. 2 grieving fathers. He realized executing the man would just create more pain for another family. He came to believe that revenge doesn't heal wounds. It just creates new ones. Then there are the final statements that haunt us for a different reason. Texas keeps an online record of last words. A clear pattern emerges. Many inmates claim their innocence until the very end. "You're killing an innocent man." We know, with absolute certainty, that some of them were telling the truth. Cameron Todd Willingham's last words were, "I am an innocent man convicted of a crime I did not commit." Years after Texas executed him, new evidence proved the fire science used to convict him was completely wrong. He was innocent. How many others were too? We'll never know. This burden falls heavily on the people who carry out the executions. The guards, the wardens. Jerry Givens was Virginia's chief executioner for 17 years. He participated in 62 executions. When he learned that some of the men he'd executed might have been innocent, it destroyed him. He became a leading voice against the death penalty, arguing the system is too flawed to risk killing an innocent person. He said the death penalty brutalizes everyone it touches. We keep searching for a more humane way to execute someone. The electric chair was supposed to be instant, but it often resulted in burning flesh and prolonged agony. The gas chamber was supposed to be like falling asleep, but witnesses described people choking and gasping for air. Lethal injection was sold as clinical and peaceful, but if the anesthesia fails, the person could feel excruciating pain while paralyzed, unable to scream. Just this year, Alabama used nitrogen gas for the first time, promising a painless death. But witnesses said the man shook and writhed on the gurney for over 20 minutes. The United States is one of the only developed democracies in the world that still executes its own citizens. We're in a category with countries like China, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. Support for the death penalty is at a 50-year low, and executions are becoming rarer, concentrated in just a handful of states. Studies also show a disturbing racial bias. You are far more likely to receive the death penalty for killing a white person than a black person. These are not easy questions, and there are no simple answers. It forces us to confront our deepest beliefs about justice, revenge, and the value of human life. What do you believe? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Did you know that in the United States, we've executed people with serious mental illnesses? Or that until 2005, we executed people who were teenagers when they committed their crimes? It's a harsh reality of our justice system. And here's something that surprises most people. The death penalty is incredibly expensive, way more expensive than life in prison. You'd think it would be cheaper, right? But the legal process is a financial black hole. Trials take longer, appeals stretch on for decades, and special housing is needed. A study in Kansas found death penalty cases cost 4 times more than other cases. California has spent over $4 billion on its system since 1978, but has only executed 13 people. So why do we still do it? For many, it's about justice, an eye for an eye. For others, it's about deterring future crimes, even though studies show it doesn't really work better than a life sentence. And for victims' families, it's often about finding closure. Knowing the person who caused them so much pain can never hurt anyone again. But there's a huge risk we have to talk about: executing an innocent person. It's happened. We know their names: Cameron Todd Willingham, Carlos de Luna, and there are likely others we haven't found yet. Every execution is a gamble that our imperfect system got it exactly right. The last words spoken in execution chambers reflect this complexity. Some show remorse, others defiance. Some are at peace, some are terrified. What they all have in common is that they are final. Once the execution happens, there's no going back. If we're wrong, we can't undo it. This forces us to ask some really tough questions. What is justice? Is revenge the same thing? How much does it cost, not just in dollars, but in human life? And how many innocent deaths are we willing to accept in the name of punishment? One? Is even one too many? There are no easy answers, just hard choices about the kind of society we want to be. The debate continues, and while it does, people are still choosing their last meals and thinking about their final words. There's a number that keeps scientists awake at night: 4%. That's how many people on death row are probably innocent, according to research from the National Academy of Sciences. For out of every 100 people waiting to be executed, did int commit the crime they re-dying for? Think about that. If you walk down a death row with 100 cells, 4 of those people are innocent. But which 4? That's the nightmare. Kirk Bloodsworth was one of them. In 1984, he was a 23-year-old former Marine, newly married. Then a 9-year-old girl was found murdered. 5 witnesses identified Kirk. He matched the police sketch. The jury sentenced him to death. The problem? He was nowhere near the crime scene. There was zero physical evidence connecting him to it. But he was convicted anyway and spent 9 years on death row, waiting to die for something he didn't do. He was saved by a miracle of science: DNA testing. In 1993, new tests proved it was scientifically impossible for him to be the killer. Kirk became the first American freed from death row by DNA. But here's the terrifying part: DNA is only available in less than 10% of murder cases. That means for 90% of cases, there's no magic bullet to prove innocence. And since 1973, Over 200 people have been freed from death row after being proven innocent. 200 lives nearly lost. So how do innocent people end up on death row? The reasons are disturbing. Official misconduct, police or prosecutors hiding evidence or lying, is found in over 70% of wrongful death penalty convictions. Perjury and false accusations are in 67%. People confessing to crimes they didn't commit is common, often after hours of high-pressure interrogation. Junk science, like bite mark analysis or flawed hair comparison, has sent people to their deaths. Remember Cameron Todd Willingham? He was executed based on fire science that was later proven to be completely wrong. The system is also deeply biased. If you kill a white person, you're far more likely to get the death penalty than if you kill a black person. Black Americans make up only 13% of the population, but over 40% of death row. And if you're poor, unable to afford a good lawyer, your chances of being sentenced to death skyrocket. Some defendants had lawyers who literally slept during their trial. The appeals process, which is supposed to catch these mistakes, often fails. Courts prioritize procedure over actual innocence. If you find new evidence but miss a deadline, you might be out of luck. The system values finality more than accuracy. Anthony Graves spent 18 years on Texas death row for a crime he didn't do because a prosecutor hid evidence and knew he was innocent. He walked free, but he described death row as torture that slowly destroyed his mind. And he's right. The conditions on death row are a form of torture. Imagine living for 20 or 30 years in a cell the size of a parking space, 6 feet by 9 feet. You eat alone, exercise alone in a cage, and might go years without touching another human being. The United Nations calls prolonged solitary confinement torture, and it does predictable, horrible things to the human brain. People develop severe anxiety, hallucinations, and lose their ability to think clearly. The suicide rate on death row is 10 times higher than in the general population. Some inmates volunteer to be executed just to escape the living hell of isolation. The Supreme Court says you can execute someone who is so mentally ill they don't understand why. But death row conditions cause severe mental illness. It's a cruel loop. We drive people insane with isolation, then sometimes say they're too insane to execute. So we keep them in the same conditions that drove them insane. Some states even medicate prisoners back to a state of sanity just so they can be legally killed. So when we talk about the death penalty, it's not just about a single injection. It's about a system that convicts innocent people. It's about decades of state-sanctioned psychological torture. It's about a lottery where your race and your bank account can determine if you live or die. The question isn't just whether people deserve to die for their crimes. The question is, can we trust our flawed, biased, and broken system to make that decision? Let's talk about the people who carry out the death penalty. The medical staff, the corrections officers, the chaplains. They watch human beings deteriorate over decades. They see the light go out of people's eyes. They hear the screaming and smell the desperation. Many develop PTSD from this work. They have nightmares. They quit their jobs. An officer in Oklahoma once testified about the severe psychological toll of executions. His colleagues needed therapy, suffered panic attacks. The state even asked the courts to slow down the pace of executions to give the staff time to recover. The judge's response? He told them to toughen up. The chaplains who spend the final hours with condemned prisoners often have it the hardest. They hold hands through glass, pray with terrified people, and hear final confessions. Then, they walk them to the execution chamber and watch them die. One chaplain quit after 10 years. He said every execution haunted him. He saw people who had changed, who had found peace, but he watched the state kill them anyway. It broke something inside him. And it's not just the staff. The families of death row inmates serve a life sentence of their own. Mothers, children, spouses. They didn't commit a crime, but they live with the constant knowledge that one day, they'll get a call with an execution date. They visit through glass, unable to hug or touch their loved one, watching them deteriorate year after year. Children grow up visiting a parent on death row, pressing their tiny hands against the glass, trying to feel a connection. They ask when daddy is coming home, and nobody knows how to answer. When the execution finally happens, these families lose their loved one all over again. The trauma passes down through generations, creating more broken families and more cycles of pain. Through all of this, we know for a fact that innocent people sit on death row. People like Kirk Bloodsworth, who was exonerated by DNA. People like Anthony Graves, who spent 18 years on death row for a crime he didn't commit. Their innocence was eventually proven. But what about the names we don't know yet? Their lives hang on so many ifs. If someone cares enough to investigate, if the evidence still exists, if the courts will listen. So many ifs standing between life and death. The system just keeps grinding forward. The real horror of death row isn't just that we execute people. It's that we torture them for decades first, with isolation and uncertainty. And we do all this knowing we sometimes get it catastrophically wrong. Scientists estimate that about 4% of people on death row are likely innocent. 4 out of every 100. With about 2,000 people on death row right now, that means approximately 80 innocent people are living in this nightmare, waiting to die for crimes they didn't commit. 80 people who will order a last meal. 80 people who will speak their final words. 80 people who will be killed by the state, not because they're guilty, but because the system failed them. And we might never know which 80. We might execute them and never discover the truth. This is the reality of the death penalty in America. It's not the clean, simple narrative of justice we see on TV. It's a messy, complicated, horrifying system that tortures people and kills the innocent. It falls hardest on the poor and people of color. It brutalizes everyone it touches. It costs more than life in prison. It doesn't deter crime. And when we get it wrong, it can never be undone. What would you eat if you knew it was your last meal and you were innocent? What would you say in your final words? Some of the people we've executed have faced exactly that situation. They said they were innocent, and we killed them anyway. And sometimes, later, we discovered they were telling the truth. This is the real story of death row, the one that includes torture, mistakes, and innocent people dying. This is what happens when we give a broken system the power of life and death.